Today we are going to talk about what software development is, and even though the question may seem obvious to many people, the first thing that comes to our minds are a lot of code being written by a set of developers. However, this is only part of the whole picture, because actually everything starts with an idea that we aim to see developed in a happy way and a reality modified and functioning according to what we have conceived previously. Of course, in order to get from the idea to the implementation, we have to go through a process of writing a lot of code, but unfortunately in the past, most of the times the results were not exactly what we have expected. So the big question was how to make sure that we get from A to B in the proper way and getting the results that we have imagined. In the beginning, there was a big mix of art and engineering in software development. Therefore, it was thought that the solution was coming from emphasizing the engineering part, and there splitting the development process into different stages, making each of them quality-proofed in a way that we make sure that the original idea is not jeopardized during the whole process. Of course, there were two major issues we can already see here. First of all the arrows are pointing in the same direction. And this is because it was assumed that the original idea was precise, well-defined, and if implemented properly, it was going to work exactly as we have imagined, without previous corroboration. This is why, thinking in such a way, the developer then was being seen as a problem rather than a facilitator. He was the impediment that was preventing us and slowing us down from the concept to the implementation, and it became basically the bottleneck of the whole process. Exactly the process, however, is where the problem lied. Developers were complaining about how the end users were changing their minds and changing their requirements, and end users were complaining about all undesired bugs and mistakes that were being introduced in the code. And every time the implementation was not resulting in or delivering the expected results, it was because the developer didn't get it, the concept, and make a wrong implementation of a very great and good idea. The problem, however, was not in the developers and was not in the people having the ideas. The problem was in the process itself. New approaches, fortunately, changed this approach to a more iterative one, where the products are developed in small increments and validating and refining the ideas during the process. Yes, most of the people are using Scrum for the projects, and each of these cycles are called a sprint. However, this was not the only change that was introduced. It's not about just working incrementally, iteratively, and bringing more collaboration into the process. It's not only about working in a time box approach. Actually, this kind of new methodologies brought much more order into the whole situation. Let's have a closer look about what happens when a person has an idea and the organization is using a methodology like Scrum. This means that the different ceremonies that Scrum is defining allows us to clearly separate what is the concept, that is the whole product backlog that we have, about everything that we are going to have at the end, what is our wish list, if you want to call it like that, and a more precise sprint backlog where we define all the concrete tasks that are going to be accomplished during a certain sprint. And this is done during the planning. So in the planning, we break down all these concepts into concrete things that are going to be implemented in a fixed cycle time. So the execution is normally taking from 2 to 4 weeks. And at the end, we are going to have the review to check this product increment that is already integrated with everything that was done before. And it is not only about the process. What we are trying to explain here in this view is that we are separating things that are conceptual, things that are about planning, execution, and validation of the results. So these 4 different stages that we have very clearly separated when we use something like Scrum are very important because it makes clear the difference between what is the implementation work, what is the planning work in concrete ideas, and what is the overall conceptual and more fluffy ideas that we have on the product backlog that are not yet ready to get implemented. If we would have asked the product owner at the beginning to have all this concept break down into executable tasks that are compliant with the so-called definition of ready, probably the end user will complain, because the necessary information that he needs in order to refine this concept and produce the sprint backlog is exactly the product increment that is being generated after every sprint. Remember please the feedback loop that we've seen previously. If you are using in addition a deployment pipeline, then you are having all of these on steroids. So everything is running smoothly from the planning to the review, and you can see a product increment built after each sprint. Now, the main point becomes not how to do things, but what things to be done. What are the concrete items that we should take from the product backlog and put into the next sprint backlog? We need to have a backlog grooming, and we need to refine it continuously in order to go from the major epics or big tasks that are not properly defined to items that are really ready to be executed and developed. This is important because actually it changes the bottleneck from what we have seen previously in the execution part, that the developers were basically the bottleneck in the previous schema, to a new bottleneck where the most important decision is not how to do things, because this is running smoothly sprint after sprint, but what exactly is important to be done next. So it is the product owner together with the team that in this prioritization and refinement of the backlog are shaping the future product that is being built. These are the most critical decisions, and what we are doing by defining these things is defining which are the rules and the domain that are going to be implemented and part of the solution. By doing this, we are defining precise rules and precise sets in our domain, and therefore formalizing a lot of knowledge. The challenges have been changed from the production to the design. The challenges have moved from the execution to the conceptual part. And now we realize that many of the disappointments in the previous approach were not because of a wrong execution, but due to the lack of feedback during the concept elaboration and refinement. This is what is introduced now, and this is one of the first symptoms that we see when Scrum teams get mature. When people start working with Scrum, most of the times the bottleneck is still the execution part. The bottleneck is still there. As long as the teams start getting mature and everything starts running smooth, then the bottleneck moves from the execution to the concept part. This is the point that we wanted to make here today. Please learn how to think carefully about the things you want to do, and you can rely now on even though the expression has been a little bit jeopardized now, I cannot think about a better one than a fine-tuned machine. And this is what any Scrum team is. So you can rely on the execution and the production that your idea is going to be executed. The challenge now is what to do next. Thank you very much for listening. Wish you a good day.